So I'm at the bus here. Today's project is to take these two black, well, they're gray water tanks actually, black in color, and I'm going to use these bed frame angles and my evolution saw and some rivets. Eventually I'll weld this, but what I'm going to do is build a frame to hold each of the two tanks so that I can mount them in the underbay. I'm going to take some measurements to start with, get my plan put together, but I think I'm going to stack them as they are right there, encase the top edges with angle, sort of hooking underneath and then cinching together, possibly with some bolts to hold some tension on it, and then those will go up into the ceiling, probably with all thread or maybe just with regular bolts, depending on how I build it. So the plan here is to get these encased on the perimeter in sort of in a stacked configuration together so that they can be mounted. And then I do have to think about the venting here. So before I stack them, I'm going to need to put some vent pipe on the rear ends of these. Probably like that part right there. I have some uniseals that actually were from my freshwater tanks, but they'll work to hold some vent pipe stubs that I can then put some flexible tubing into to vent the drainage system. So what I'm doing right now is actually putting this tank into the bottom bay to kind of just see the space and visualize how it's going to fit with two stacked on top of each other. We'll be joining the 3-inch outlets or 4-inch outlets together. Now I already have the waste valve. It's on the other side of the bay over there. So we're going to set this in, and I got to get a feel for how I'm going to build this. Alright, so from a length standpoint, it fits kind of perfect in the bay. I got to check the width on the inside to make sure that it isn't causing problems where the bus frame rail is in relation to the sidewalls. So we'll see what happens there. But actually, now that I'm talking about it, I realize that that's not going to work because there's no room for the elbow. So it's not good, actually. What I'll have to do then is put that elbow on that corner, and then the piping will catch the draining water along the wall there, because the main drain's coming out sort of right behind where that cabinet is right there. It's going to come down, and then I'll hook it over toward the wall, support it with the wall, and then we'll elbow into the 3-inch pipe or with a reducer and a clean out right about there, and then both of those will be joined together, and then the actual flush valve, or the valve that empties, will be underneath the tanks coming out this way, and it'll be right there when it finishes. That's my plan anyway. So looks like two tanks stacked together should work. I just don't know exactly how close or how they're going to relate in relation to the frame. So I got to get in there, flip that tank around, and push it up into the ceiling space and see how it fits. So what I've actually figured out is that the sides of the bay are a little too narrow, and this won't be quite the orientation, but what I'm going to do is actually strap the tanks in the center on both sides, and they'll be strapped to the main frame rail, which is super strong. So I'll build some angle with some all thread to pull the tank up into position, and then I'll also put straps along the outside perimeter up through those channels on top of the main frame rails. So that'll be the way we mount the tanks. It'll be less fabrication work actually, because the top edge will be supported against the frame rail itself. I'll probably put some blocking in because of the 1/2-inch rod in the middle here, but it will be stiffened up into the frame rail. The only disadvantage is if I need to get into the wire looms up there, I've got to take out the tanks, but there's no openings in those looms through there, so I would expect that would be a rare occasion that we'd ever have to access that, and if we do, it's just bad luck. So anyway, that's the plan. Both tanks are going to be up in the center of the frame rails. That'll leave more storage on the sides anyhow. Trying to get all the way in to grab stuff is challenging. So the other advantage here is it'll hold the weight in the center of the bus instead of off to one side. So I like that as well. So we have lots of this metal that my brother salvaged. It's extremely thick. It's like at least 1/8 inch walls. It actually is the perfect dimension to serve as the guide rails underneath. So all we'll need to do is get the 4 corners because these are so strong, and then the strapping underneath will help support over the frame rails. I'll just get some high quality ratchet straps or some kind of metal banding to be able to tension that as well. So I may even create some loops in the center of this, tack on some loops and a bar underneath so that the strapping is holding into the metal. So anyhow, this will work nicely. I'm going to start making some cuts for side rails, 4 of them, and then I'll be riveting angle iron in place to serve as, or even some of this, to serve as locations for the all thread to go through. Alright, so my next step here is to dismantle this piece. There's some flat stock there that I can clean up and use, and then this tubular rectangle profile steel. These will be the guide rails, 4 of them. Then I'll probably cut up the other ones. I got a few more like this. I'll cut up some other pieces to help strengthen the cross support. And I may even just cage the thing and use 4 cross members per, so that we have sort of a structural cage around it. I got to think about it. I don't want to go too overkill. It's a lot of work. So anyway, my next step is to get the angle grinder and cutoff wheel wherever the heck I put that, and get this thing cut up so that I can then use the evolution saw to make the length cuts. Actually, I figured out how to get this positioned so I can use the evolution saw to kind of separate the pieces initially. So we're going to make some cuts here, get this thing disconnected. And there we go. Just like cutting wood with a circular saw, this sucker just slices like a hot knife through butter. That's some thick bead right there we went through. Acted like it wasn't even there. Alright, about one more cut here and we'll have this big assembly separated. Got the pieces there. So the idea here is we're going to chop these again here after the rusty spot on up with a measurement for the sides of the tank. We'll cut that cross support out a little bit as well. Although it actually might have purpose. If I take a measurement from there, we might be able to use this to kind of foot the tank on one side. I don't know. Probably better just to not have it there. I have to think about that one. But anyhow, the idea here is to separate these, and I'm going to reuse this metal as the side supports. Alright, so there's the first length. I'm going to have to angle grind these off with the cutoff wheel, these stubs. But what it'll do is go right under the lip here, if I can fit it. It'll go right under this lip. And gotta look at what's going on over here. I'm not sure why it's not going all the way in. I gotta take a look. Oh, now I know. It's this. It's just this band clamp I got to adjust where it's being tightened. Okay, so there's the second piece of metal. Again, I've got to angle grind the nubs off. So what I'm going to do now is flip this upside down, and I'm going to do some layout so that we'll cut some cross supports that are going to serve to be where the all thread goes through, and we'll drill holes. I'll clamp them in place, and then we'll drill holes for all thread, probably 5/16 or 3/8. Probably 3/8 all thread actually would be the better bet. I think that's about the size of existing holes up in the edge of the frame, so that would be pretty helpful. If the holes were already the right size, I won't have to drill new holes. So anyhow, that's the plan. I'll keep going here. So what I've got here is it flipped upside down. I've laid these on. Now we're going to make some pieces that lay on top of these and go a little bit further out so that we can use them for the all threads in 4 corners. Okay, and then we'll do strapping in the middle after I block it and put another piece of metal in as a cradle. That might be as a bolt with the sleeve to space it out. Well, that would be a good idea, actually. I might get long bolts, drill a hole, and space out a sleeve, or I might just weld one or two spots, maybe just in the middle, where a strap can help tighten this up into the frame, overlapping. We can get some heavy-duty ratchet strapping. But even just this metal on 4 corners should be pretty secure. But I wouldn't mind it being snugged in with a strap just to keep the tank tight against the frame as well. So anyhow, what I'm going to do now is lay these out with I'll take measurements, cut pieces, and then I'll lay them out with clamps. And I'll be drilling holes, 1/4-inch through holes, for grade 8 1/4-inch bolts, and or 5/16. I got to see what I have. And we'll bolt these through in the corners. And then after we've got that done, we'll clean these edges up, finish the fabrication, and possibly get some welding done. And then the last thing will be to paint these. So I got to build 2 like this. I think just bolting them in the 4 corners and having a ratchet strap in the middle will be good, just because this metal is so incredibly strong. It's very thick walled tube steel. Okay, so as part of this next step, my intention is to reuse these holes. I'm going to take a measurement of those. I think they're going to be 1/2 inch, but I could be wrong. They might be 7/16. But I'm going to take a quick measurement with the tape. And I figured out that the distance side to side for the crossbars needs to be 40 inches roughly to be able to accommodate the hole spacing that's already there. That'll be really handy for getting this tank mounted to be able to reuse these existing holes. They might be angled a little bit on the all thread, but not a big deal once we've squished it up into the frame here. I'm going to use wooden block because of that. I think that's a J-hook there. Because of that, we're going to block the tank in with some wood, probably some plywood runners, just to kind of keep it in the right position. But anyhow, about 40 inches on the side supports is going to work. And I'm going to take a quick measurement to figure out what the diameter of these holes is. Like I said, I think it's a little bit larger than I need, but I'll probably do 3/8, but that'll work pretty well. I'll just use washers and lock nuts. Alright, so what I did here is I've gone in 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch from the end, because this is 1.5 inches. Found a center hole. I'm going to do this on the ends of the side supports. I used a 1/4 inch bit, but I might have to run to Tractor Supply and see if they have longer bolts. Well, I know they have them, but the ones I have inside the bus are just a little too short. I'm probably going to widen this to 5/16. Even though, well, 1/4 would probably work, because all it's doing is holding the bottom one to the top one. It's not really supporting the weight, the metal on metal contact. Yeah, we'll stick with 1/4 inch. I'm just going to go into Tractor Supply and get some bolts after I drill the holes. So I widened the holes to 5/16. I kind of pinned them in place with the bolts that are a little bit too short. I'm just doing this so I can continue to fabricate. So I've got these 2 rails pinned in with bolts with no nuts. And right now I've clamped that corner where it needs to be. And then I'm going to drill this corner. Once this is drilled, I'll pin it, and then I'll drill that corner over there. So after that, I'll have this sort of ready to possibly take in the bay and mark for 3/8 holes for the all thread to come down in. I've got to look at how this lines up with those holes. Alright, so I have each of the 4 corners pinned with a 5/16 bolt, albeit too short. This is, in essence, what supports the tank. There'll be 4 corners, like I said, of all thread. Those will come in somewhere in these channels. I'll be drilling more holes once I mark them. So what I'll probably do is, once I have this frame put together, I'll probably tack weld the corners while it's connected to the tank to keep it from shifting. You know, just run a little tack in each of these to keep the shape after I tighten it down. And of course we're going to grind these off, like I said, cut them off, the extra stubs. But then I'll take just the frame in, and I'll figure out where exactly along this width the hole needs to be for the all thread that'll connect up to the bus framing. So anyhow, making good progress. I'm going to keep going here. Okay, so I've got some lengths of metal here cut again. Still have to angle grind off the nubs when I'm done. But this saw, if you're going to work with metal, invest in this. It was 200 some bucks. Makes this so much easier than cutting metal with an angle grinder. I wish I had bought this when I started the bus project. I didn't even know they existed then though. So this Evolution saw is amazing. Makes working with thick steel like working with wood as far as the cuts go. Alright, so I'm working on this second frame. I've got 2 holes drilled through the corners. Got to go over and do these sides now. So after I drill those holes, I think I'm going to call it quits for tonight. Alright, I have the corners pinned. When I come back next time, I'll bring my angle grinder with the cutoff wheels. I'm not sure where I put the one I had over here, or my brother might have borrowed it, I don't know. But anyway, I've got the 4 corners pinned and I'm ready to do the centerpiece. Got to go get some longer bolts for these. Once I've got them sort of roughed in, we'll get the welder while they're on the tank laying on. I also got to make sure the tanks don't have variation. I should have probably swapped tanks for the second one, but should be the same dimension, hopefully. But I'll need to just put some tacks in after we bolt these down, just to make it double secure. So, you know, the weight will actually be borne by these end pieces. This will be flipped over and then through bolted to the roof. So, or not the roof, the frame in the understorage bay. So, anyway, that's it for tonight. I'm gonna get back at it tomorrow. So I'm back here at the bus working on these tanks. I actually stopped at my local auto parts store and they have a bolt center, nuts and bolts. So I got the right bolts for the corners, the longer 5/16 bolts. So we're going to put those in place and see how it snugs up. And I decided I'm actually not going to weld these frames together. The way that I've built them, the bolts will be just fine. The tanks will hold them in shape. So I'd like it to be removable if need be to replace the tanks if I have a problem. So anyhow, so I'm going to keep at it with this project, get the bolts put in place, and then we'll take the angle grinder and clean up the stubs. Okay, so what I'm doing right now with the angle grinder is getting these appendages cut off. We had the little pokey part from the bracing right here, and then this was a little circular stub that I'd cut off before. So when you reuse materials, well, you don't spend in money, you end up spending a little bit in labor, of course. So that's what I'm doing right here. But it's still better to use what you've got in most cases. Especially stuff this thick, I would have to spend a lot of money to get metal this solid. It's pretty good stuff. A little rusty around the edges, but it'll work for this purpose exceptionally well. So then I'm wire brushing it with a little drill just to prep it for some paint. Okie doke, so I've got the last piece here of this rig wire wheeled, and I've got all the nubs cut off of these. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt them in together, and we'll have very little welding to do. Actually, just that piece in the center. Once it's bolted together, I'll put a couple of tacks on that, just to kind of keep it positioned. That'll be where the straps connect in the center. So you don't see that piece, it's sitting over there. But anyway, I'm going to get this bolted together. After I do both of these, I'm going to figure out whether I can put a coat of paint on these, or if it's about 30 degrees outside. I don't know how quickly they'll dry, but I could move on to something else while they're drying. So I may still paint them. I got to do a quick web search and see if it's just a matter of time or whether it fundamentally messes with the process of painting. I suspect it may not be advisable. But anyway, I am going to get this assembled at this point. Okay, so this is the first corner I'm going to bolt down with these longer bolts. Got some fender washers. So I'm going to torque these down and First I'm going to dry fit to make sure I have things oriented correctly. Then I'm going to torque these down. But I've got nylon lock nuts. This will be upside down. Even if the nut would happen to come out, the pin would actually still hold things together fairly well, because all threads are going to be going through these bars in the upside down from how they are right now. So these will be supporting the weight, these end bars, by way of supporting these bars. So anyway, I'm going to keep going at it. Alright, so we've got the bolts connected. Over here I couldn't use the washers. There was a little bit of swelling of the steel, probably from a little bit of rust. But I don't think I really absolutely need these, so it'll be alright. So anyway, I think at this point I'm going to move on to the second tank and get it out of the bay, get it set over here, and ready to have the same treatment done. So right there's the second tank with the frame around it. I've got them both. That one I disassembled, but I've got them both ready for paint. So my next step is working with the all thread to try to figure out the spacing empirically from under the bus in the bay between the two holes I need to drill to support the tanks, based on the existing holes right next to the main cross members in the secondary members. They're about 3/8 of an inch or so. So I've cut these 3-foot pieces in half. There were 4 of them. Now I've got 8 individual sticks at about 18 inches. Now I'm going to deburr these with the cutoff wheel edge, just to kind of take some of the material away so I can start the nuts from that side. So I want to get them started, thread them reasonably far up to begin with, and then when we put the tank in, I'll have the factory edges up top to make it real easy to get the nuts and washers on up there. So that is the plan. I want to do the hard part here before I'm in the bay working. So I've got these deburred and the nuts started on the part that I'd cut. Again, I wanted to do that before I got into the bay and found that I had spurs keeping the nuts from getting on the rod. I'm going to actually hold these with vice grips and try to tighten these on a little bit further. And ultimately these will go all the way up as we put the tanks on. But I just want to get them started a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is take 2 of these into the bay with the tape measure and a couple of nuts. I'm going to hang the rods from the existing holes, and I'm going to measure between them, and then we're going to drill holes at that spacing on the crossbars of each of the 2 tank setups. Okay, so I've got those hanging. Now I'm just going to measure between them, and we'll use that to lay out the holes. So I also need to measure the length, which should, between holes, be about 61 inches to figure out which holes I'm going to use. So these holes are all pre-drilled, fortunately enough, at the right spot within these channels. So I actually figured out that the 62 inches that we have roughly with the framing added, that extra 3 inches, I should have been more aware, causes problems with what I had planned to do to fit them into the bay. It's not insurmountable though. I think what I can do, we're about to test it anyway, is slide some of the tank in under the frame member, which I believe is 14 inches from the floor. I've got to look at the way this works once I get the tanks over there. I don't know if we'll get enough slope. That's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Once I lay them in there, headed toward the bay door. But I've got to basically figure out a somewhat new plan here so I don't have to grind. Also, be aware on this MVP, the bays were different sizes, which I just now came to realize. My assumption was I could mirror the tanks the way I was going to do it, and I could get one in, but this other one's a bit of a pickle, so I'm trying to modify the plan to make sure they'll both fit the way I had originally intended. To be determined if I can make that work. But anyhow, they may have to go side by side and take up a little bit more room. Not quite sure what's going to work yet. I also have to be aware I need room for the fittings to elbow out of here. So that's a bit of a concern as well. I've got about 60 inches wide in the one bay. What I may end up doing is putting them more toward the center, next to each other, and do it that way. But it's definitely not working out quite like I thought it would, but that's to be expected. Okay, so what I figured out is my original plan is totally foobar. So putting these in, what I'm going to do is I'll be drilling the angle, or the holes for the support rods on this bar here on the interior, spaced sort of toward the edges. I'm going to trim these off close right here and here with the angle grinder, and I'm going to stagger the tanks a little bit this way and that way. One's going to go this way with its spout, the other's going to go that way with its spout, and then I'll need to do the proper 3.5 inch piping or 4 inch piping to join the two. I'll probably use some fern cones as well, but in doing that, what I will end up with is a setup that allows me to properly mount these in only one bay, although the tails will, they'll go across the middle, but that'll allow me to get this done because I'm dealing with only 60 inches roughly of width, and this is about 30 inches, 29 inches when I cut it close, plus a stub, although hopefully I'll be able to drop that down a little lower on each side, so that I can make the piping work. So anyway, this will make more sense once once I've got it set up, but definitely having to rework the plan here, but that happens. Alright, so I've trimmed the edges on this one. Now I'm going to work on that one the same way. Alright, so right there I've got these both trimmed. Now I have to determine the spacing for the holes that I'm going to drill for support on this side and this side of each. We'll see where they need to be. So this is how they're going to end up. This one's going to drop a little lower on this end, and that one's going to drop a little lower on that end. And or they might be leveled almost, but I got to have clearance for this to get under the skinny side of this tank. So they might be offset a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be marking on these bars, I'm going to be marking the relative distance of the frame members, so that I have a place to drill the holes, 3/8 holes, and then we're going to rod this in position. Alright, so I marked out the places where the rods are going to go through with little permanent marker there. I'm going to drill pilot holes with 1/4 inch, and then I'll widen them to 3/8, and then I'll have to drill some new holes in the ceiling. So we'll get started with the drilling of the holes here. I'm going to paint this with tractor paint, these metal pieces, before I install them. So where I've marked the holes, I progressively drilled them out from 1/4 up to 3/8. Got the holes put in, tested the all thread, make sure it went through. What I'm going to do now is slap a coat of paint on these, just some black tractor paint, to make sure they don't rust out. So the last thing I did here today is to slap a coat of black tractor paint on these. I'll flip them over and get the other side before I install them. But nice thick paint should keep it from rusting, make it look a little better. So that's where we're quitting for today. Alright, so it's a little bit of a frosty day after Thanksgiving here. I'm going to go ahead and use that drill and get the 3/8 holes drilled in the ceiling. Well, the ceiling of the bay, top of the bay, to mount the tanks with the all thread. And then we'll get the tanks mounted in place. And I went and got hopefully all the plumbing parts I need to get the plumbing on the tanks done. So just for good measure, I'm going to add 2 more rods to each tank. I'm going to cut these in half, so in the middle there'll be basically 3 on either end, I think the tank will weigh about 600 to 700 pounds each full. I don't know what the tensile strength is of these, but I'd imagine each one's at least 150 to 200 pounds. So 6 of them ought to do the trick. So what I'm doing now is getting the tanks ready to put them into the bay. I've got the frames going around. I'll do some touch-up paint once they're mounted. I don't really think we are going to get much rust, but I did get the rusty spots on the metal coated, so we'll do some touch-up with the black paint just to cover up the yellow spots. But right now I'm getting these ready. They're going to go in the bay, and hopefully we'll get them in position. So the next step in the process is to drill 1 1/4 inch holes for this uniseal to fit 3/4 PVC. I'm going to adapt the 3/4 PVC down to a barb fitting to go to the vent, which is going to be flexible 1/2 inch inside diameter line. So I got the hole saw. I'm going to put it right there on this side of this tank, and on this other tank over here, it's going to go on the side with this, and it's probably going to be either here or over here. So same thing. So I'm going to get those holes drilled so that I can put together the fittings and get it mounted. So I actually moved the line in a little bit because the cross members are going to go pretty close here. So I wanted it inside the 2 cross members of the frame, and then the line will go over. So anyway, I'll do the other one similarly, so they're fairly close together. Alright, so that uniseal's in, and so is this one. These are for 3/4 PVC. I'm going to run home for a bit, and then I'll be back later. So hopefully by the end of the evening I'll have these tanks mounted. With extra luck I'll have them mounted and the pipes done, but that might be asking a lot for one night, so we'll see where we get. Alright, so I came back and tried to get these tanks mounted this evening. So I've got these 2 stubs. I'm going to chop it off a little bit to go through the uniseal. These are going to be the vent stubs. And then we'll thread down to a barb fitting for 1/2 inch flex tube. So I'm going to make some cuts here, and then we'll glue this in, and then we'll push them through the uniseals before we put the tanks in. Alright, so here we go. These will go down on the uniseals. I'll push them down, and the barb fittings will go to the vent lines. So I made 2 of them, 1 for each tank. As is typical, I can never get the purple stuff not to run everywhere. Alright, so right there I put the uniseal in the tank. I just kind of wet the end and pushed it down in. Same thing on this one. So they're both pointing toward the passenger side here when they get mounted. I'm going to go ahead and connect the tubes that'll tee together from these. Probably be about, 5 feet on each side of tube if I had to guess. And what that'll do is allow me to slip those over the frame as I put the tanks in. Alright, so here I am in the bay. I've got that tube going over the railing. It's going to stay in that position as I raise the tank, so that we have clearance over the rail and the tank can be cinched tight against the frame. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get the tank supports put in position, 3 on each end, and I'll get the thing threaded up into place. Okay, so I've got this end started with the hanging process. I've just loosely fastened the 3 nuts up top. Now I'm going to go to the other side. After I get everything loose on that side, I'll put the other tank in similarly with loose nuts, and then what I'm going to do is kind of make sure the tanks are in alignment properly before I get them really fastened much more securely. So anyway, just want to make sure, yeah, I've got the spout on the correct side over there, just double checking. So I'm going to go put those 3 up into the ceiling here. So I've got one tank suspended loosely. Haven't tightened everything down yet. Got the other one moved in. I've got to put the rods on this side. I couldn't slide it all the way in. Couldn't slide either one all the way in because that's only 12 inches. The rods are like 18 inches. So anyhow, I'm going to get back at this tomorrow. I'm out of time tonight. So it's the next day. I'm going to get back at the tank mounting here. Get the second tank loosely put into position, and then we'll get to tightening things. Alright, so there I have the first one on this tank loosely put in. I'm going to get a little bit of electrical tape and throw it over the top here to pull that hose over as I go. A little bit of a trick there. So anyhow, let me go do that. Okay, so I have the electrical tape wrapped around that vent tube so I can pull it over the beam there once this is put in place. I've got the three all threads just kind of loosely mounted. Now I'm going to move to the other side over there and get those three put in position. Okay, at this point I've got both sides of both tanks suspended. You can see I've got them offset enough that we can stem out here without bumping into things. So the next step is going to be to tension both sides up in the beams here to lock the rods in place at the top, and then we'll screw the bottoms up to lift the tank up into this main beam, this main frame support. The question I have is how much padding I want to implement here. I think I'm going to use some foam on the corners here, on the edges, to lock this into the beam with a little bit of dampening so that we don't damage the plastic over time as we drive. So I think I'm going to use this kind of foam. I got to see if I have some 1-inch foam left over, and that would be what I'd prefer to use to kind of hold these into the beam under tension. So I'm going to go scrounge for that. So I took some foam and carpet and tape. I made little pads. These are going to go up into the edges here where the tank is going to meet the frame to kind of soften the contact a little bit. I don't want the vibrations to wear through the tank, and it'll dampen things a little bit when we hit bumps. So anyway, I'm going to get these put in place on the edges, and then we'll start tightening these rods up. So here's what doing this job looks like. It's a lot of upside down. So I've locked these in with the ones up top, and that stiffens the rod. You have to use a pair of vice grips as part of this process up on the rod at times. Just be careful not to bangle the threads. And then what I'm doing right now is just trying to raise this nylon lock nut up a little bit. So I think these were a mistake. I just used standard lock washers and then maybe cap with these when it's all done, just to make it extra secure. But right now I'm trying to move that nut up. Probably don't need to be on my back for this part, but I was already here from doing this one. So anyway, that's the process. It's tedious using a box end wrench. So all thread's not the easiest to work with, but it gets the job done. Okay, so I'm just about done mounting these tanks on the all threads here. I've got these sides tight up and down. It's snugged. You can tell I can actually shake the bus by just pulling on the all thread here. So the tanks are snug in position. I got to tighten the other side of this one right here, and then I can connect the vent lines and start connecting the plumbing. I'm going to use Fern Coast to make these removable. I don't want to glue all the components, so I want to make it so I can get to the wiring if I absolutely have to. You know, the wire runs that run from front to back of the bus. But shouldn't be very likely I'll have to do that, but just in case. So at this point the tanks are both mounted and secure. The next step is to go inside the bus, and I'm going to drill the hole through the floor where the drain line's going to go. That way I'll have it referenced inside the bus. I'll be able to then position or figure out my plan for the piping so that the drain all ends up where I need it to be, filling from that side, transferring between the two tanks and out through the outlet here. I'd like the drain to enter close to the pipe that'll go under the tanks at the low point, because that way the solids coming out of the drain will tend to rest there and the liquid will tend to back up into the tank. That's my plan, to keep solids out of the tank. That way the flush power of the tanks rushing out will keep the solids blown out of the system. At least that's my hope. That I won't have to flush these tanks very often with fresh water to get the solids out. But anyway, it'll come together. The next step, like I said, is to drill the hole through the floor and figure out where that ends up. So right here is where the main drain for everything up here is going to flow through. I'm just going to drill a 3.5 inch hole. I'm going to start with a smaller bit and just drill a reference hole. That's going to tell me when I look down below where I'm at in relation to the girder. I'll take a measurement down there, and then from that I can kind of judge where to drill it up here. So I'm going to start with that smaller hole. I'm going to drill that sort of in the middle here. Okie doke, so that hole there is going to show me where I am in relation to the supports. Hopefully I'm right in between two of them, and then I'll drill the bigger hole with the larger drill and hopefully not rip my arm off this time. And there's the hole. It's actually right in between. So that actually would be a good point to almost center the hole on. So I'll probably come over a little bit from here to start the 3.5 inch hole. Just about 1/4 inch over. So that'll drop down. See where that is? That'll drop down that channel, and then it'll join up over here with this pipe for the drain. So it's gonna go down this way with an elbow, and then I'll put the trap in behind. I'll build the trap in behind here, and then it'll go down and then drop right down into a T right here. So that's the plan. Well, that beast of a hole saw finally got me. I scratched myself pretty good when it fell after yanking itself on the metal. Definitely not fun working with this stupid hole saw. This hopefully is the last time I have to do this. Alright, so after some blood and some bad words, got the hole through the floor. I'm going to go ahead and get a Band-Aid. Alright, now that the floor hole is cut, the next step is to do a dry fit plumbing. I'm going to start cutting the 3.5, I believe, is the diameter pipe into little pieces to fit these fittings on. This is going to go this way right at that first outlet, and then the pipe from the ceiling is going to come into the top, and then this is going to elbow under the tanks. So anyway, I'm going to figure out how many pieces I need to cut for joining pipe, and I'll get those cut on the saw here. Okay, back at the bus here on Sunday after Thanksgiving, and I'm going to be doing the 3-inch piping to start with here from the large fittings at the end of these tanks, and also joining that vent tube together and getting it extended. So anyhow, the ground is really sloppy and muddy. It's been snowed last night, and then it melted, and it's been drizzly this morning. So I've got some foam to lay on, fresh foam to keep myself from getting too sloppy. And I'm going to get started here with the layout. I'm going to do everything dry fit to start with before I use glue. So to make this process easier, I'm trying to glue fairly little, only where I really have to, and I'm mostly using these fern coats as I can. So I'm going to have this dip down at 45 degrees here, this elbow from there. Then I have a 22.5 PVC piece. That's going to join to a long piece of pipe, but in the middle there will be a T that'll go over this way and elbow over. I want the valve to be right here in the corner, sort of hanging right there below that rod. Well, if you can see it below that rod, I want to have it almost where it is now, only elevated a little bit. I'll just do it with some wire initially, but the idea here is that I want any particles to come in and be flushed through the system by both tanks. So the actual drains will connect to the pipe on the other side. You'll see that later, but it'll be done in such a way that it will be easy to clean out, and the tanks should not get a bunch of solid waste in them. Alright, so that's the first section. I've just fasten the fern hose a little bit with the impact drill. I have not glued anything yet. I'll have to take some measurements and make cuts and so on to get this figured out. But I'm going to go to the other side and do the same kind of a setup. Try to get it directing to where it'll be able to sweep out this way. So we'll do the same thing on the other side. Alright, and here's the mock-up on the other side. The drain will come in through an adapter right here. This will get tied to the all thread and or the railing kind of to support it. We've got a 22.5 over here heading that way. So the hard part here is going to be to measure the pipe assembly so that I can join these two pieces. I need the distance across the tanks and lengthwise down the tanks to join these sections. And I need to put a T in there and an elbow and some other stuff, and it's all in positions where I can't really get to it. So the truth of it is I just have to get the measurements right and and make the assembly out here, and hopefully get things done well enough that I can assemble it without too much difficulty. And my intention is to block some wood underneath the cross pipe. Okay, so there's the assembly I made to hold the gate valve. It's going to get wired to these supports to keep it from bouncing around too much. It's going to connect to the end of that 22.5 piece, kind of like this. Back in like that, to give you an idea of the fitment. And I'm probably going to have to cut that stem off right there, possibly, or shorten this piece a little bit. I'm going to have to adjust that section there to narrow it down a little bit, so this goes over just a touch, avoiding that rod. To be determined, but at this point I'm going to use an elbow and get this centered over here, and then figure out what the section here needs to be behind, and then to align with the other side, and then I'll get this elbow on the assembly. After that, we're going to put them together, and we'll make a measurement of the cross piece that goes lengthwise down, connecting the two sides. So here's where we're at. We got the gate valve, got the 22.5, kind of evening things out here off this 90. Got this assembly ready to glue together here. Now what I'm doing is measuring the length I need from that pipe to this end. This will be offset. I already kind of worked with it right here, but I might need to at some point make some trim cuts to get things to fit perfectly as I go. But what I'm doing right here is taking a measurement, and I'm going to use a fern coat to attach on that side as well, a fern coat sleeve. So I'm going to deduct about 1.5 inches, maybe almost 2 inches from the length that I have here for this pipe. But I'm going to take the measurement from that end of that collar to the inside of that collar with a stiff tape measure, and hopefully it'll be accurate. It'll be a critical piece. I don't want to have to go to the hardware store to get another length of pipe. What I actually decided to do here is just use the piece of pipe that I'm going to cut, and I'll put a piece of electrical tape on the cut line once I got it lined up in the position. That way I don't have to transfer measurements, so that should be easier. Okay, so right there I'm leaving a little bit of a gap for a pipe stub to come out, and then we're going to use the fern coat sleeve to join these two sections. Actually, I might even want a touch more of a gap right in there. That should work. And then I'm going to look at where the collar is here and put a piece of this electrical tape in that position. Can't film while I do that though. Too close in here. Okay, so here's that section. Being able to slide this sleeve over the end here to couple to the 22.5 degree fitting. That's going to help as far as getting it put into position. The 90 degree fern coats are awfully tight to put pipes in, but these sleeves are a little bit more forgiving, so that's why I chose to use that to join the pipes, and then we can just impact wrench the whole thing together. So I think it's smart to use the fern coats. I would not want to try to glue this together. This whole assembly would take forever to put together if it was exclusively with glue. So this dry fitting process is helpful, plus later I'll be able to take this apart if I have to in a few different sections, so that I can drop the tanks if that's a necessity for some reason. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get these assemblies put together with glue at this point. Should be good. I'm going to finish the last bit of dry fitting on the other side with sliding that Fernco over. All right, so I've got the I finished the process of dry fitting this. The last connection here was this Fernco. So at this point, I'm ready to glue the PVC pieces together, and these will give us some flexibility to block this at the right angle so it drains nicely. I do want it to be level, this pipe, off the floor, so we'll use the same dimension of blocking for the whole thing. So anyhow, this went together a little easier than I thought it would. So we're going to start on one end and use glue and go all the way to the other, just joining it as we go. I think I'm going to start on that side. Well, I'll start over here. I'll do this part, start on that side, and the last thing I'm going to do is this piece here with the Fernco. So it gives us a little bit of a wiggle room. Alright, so I just finished the priming and gluing of this side. Now I'm going to move on to the other side, except for the top here where the drain will join. I got another fitting for that I'll do when I actually install the drains. So I'm making progress here. I've got the gate valve glued on. I've got these primed and ready to glue for this T. The last thing I'm going to do is glue that joint right there on the inside. So that's probably the most critical. I'm going to actually do that first, so that well, no, I'm going to do it after I've done these parts of the T, so I can make sure it's level. Alright, so at this point I've got the drain assembly fully glued together. All I have to do is put this Fernco in place, and then maybe adjust some of them as I do the final assembly, which will be easy enough to do with the band clamps and the drill. Alright, so I get this side assembled. I have it blocked up right there. Now I've got to go over and slide that sleeve on, and I think I'm pretty much done with this drain assembly, except for the final blocking and support for the pipe. Alright, so I've just finished the final attachment over here of this Fernco. Everything's glued together. Just got to support everything at an even height as far as that pipe goes. Not sure exactly what the plan will be, but I think it'll be a combination of wire on each side and maybe some wooden blocking underneath. I'm not sure how I'll attach the wooden blocking to the pipe. Maybe with some additional wire, some holes drilled through the wood, I'm not sure. Just want to give it a little bit of support. But I've got all the band clamps tightened, and at this point I'll be ready to adapt that to 1.5 inches. There's going to be a flexible trap in here, a deep trap. It's going to actually go right over the pipe here, so it's not in the way. And then there'll be some clean outs at each elbow. I'll have a clean out for the 1.5 inch pipe to make it easy to maintain. So, if we get grease in it or whatever, I can easily separate or run a snake through it. So, anyhow, this is the conclusion of the gray water tank installation, except for the venting there. Kind of moving on to the drain lines at this point. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to start here and taper it down to 1.5 inch drain pipe, and then we'll start working up toward the hole I cut in the ceiling for the drain. Okay, so I'm making some progress here. I've got a fairly deep trap assembly. The urine diverter is going to connect on a hose right there. That way the trap also keeps air from coming back in from the urine tubes from the composting toilets. So they'll be teed together and go through that. So now we're going to branch over from the top here over to here, and then we're going to come up into the hole right there. I've got this clean out here, kind of ready to go up through here like so. Whoop, if I can hold it in the right spot so that I have another ability to snake it if I need to. So I'm trying to make this easy to disconnect. I'll probably create this with another Fernco on the other side of this fitting. Unfortunately, Lowe's was sold out of those, so I wasn't able to get the last one that I needed. But what I'll do in the meanwhile, I'll just put a little tape there in the position of the Fernco to hold things together. What I'm doing right now is I'm going to connect the two tank vents together. I got to pull that piece of electrical tape, and I've got a clamp and a barbed T fitting here. Got some clamps in the barbed T to join the two lines so that they all vent together. So that's what I'm doing. Alright, so I got the two hoses connected on that T. Now I'm going to extend the two with the part that I cut there. Alright, so I've got the assembly here connected. I'm just going to lift that up and bracket it in place. This goes over to the hole. I'm going to Fernco it here, joining it to this section right here. Probably with a fairly short stub. I got to see how much room that is. Get it trimmed if need be. So pretty quick progress. Almost done under the bus here. Alright, so with the addition of this little stub here, we basically are done with the drain. I'm going to put a Fernco there to connect these two pieces. That way this assembly can be taken down to clean it out if I need to. And then I'm going to wire this up into the frame. I'm going to drill some tiny holes, maybe 3/16, and then put some coated wire on each of the cross members there to hold the pipe in place. So that'll work out pretty nicely. Same thing here. I'll kind of sling it from here to here with some wire or a strap just to hold this in place as it goes down the road. Then I got to clean out there as well. So anyhow, I'm going to call it done for the underbay. Got the tanks in, got all the plumbing for gray water done. Just got to do a few finishing touches, tighten things up a little bit, and we'll be good to go.